Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Hesham from Guards to Guardians program. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
And thanks for having me today as well, Hesham. We just got back from Chowchilla Correctional Institution, the largest women's prison in the United States. We were asked to do a presentation there today in their block training, mandatory training for correctional officers, and they wanted us to do a presentation on the importance of communication in corrections and why it is one of the most important tools we have. So before we get on that topic, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Hesham from Guards to Guardians, and could you please tell us about your program and what it does for the correctional officers? What does it offer correctional officers?
Yeah, for sure. So our program is meant to help officers have the tools and support they need, to be able to be, not just survive corrections, but to thrive in corrections. One thing that we deal with a lot of officers is, how to deal with the stresses of the job. And then more importantly, how do they see the impact that officers have at the job? It's a noble profession that doesn't get the amount of, credit and validation that it needs. And we are here saying, hey, we are here, we see you, and here are some tools and support that can really help you to engage differently, have more impactful meetings with inmates, your colleagues and staff. But not only that, also what you do when you take it home. Every officer hears, don't take the job home, but that's just not true. In some form, you will take the job home, and then there's an armor that gets built. So how do you start to take it off? How do you deal with those mental stresses of the job in a way that it can be handled right there in that moment, and then you can go about your day. One of the things that officers tell me each time is like, when we go through some of the materials, oh, I never quite learned this. I didn't get this kind of training before. And we're here to help officers from our nonprofit in a way that we believe can really help officers to have a sense of purpose, sense of fulfillment, joy, and happiness. And that doesn't mean not to struggle. I think a lot of the good things in life is you work hard for them. So we challenge officers, helping them change their mindset to see corrections in a bigger view than what is normally projected.
And it's so important that there is an outlet for the officers, a place they can go like Guards to Guardians. We let them know there's 20 officers that are mentors already on the program. If they need any help with anything, they can get a hold of Guards to Guardians and speak to any one of the 20 of us that either are retired from corrections or still active in corrections, and discuss problems knowing it's confidential, private. They'll never have to worry about management knowing what we talked about, because let's face it, as a correctional officer, there's sometimes things I didn't want my manager to know. Look, when I was a young correctional officer, I got behind in a couple of bills, and I thought, I'm not want to be embarrassed or my agency think that I'm not capable or failing.
Totally.
So I didn't go for any help. I struggled through it, and I made it, luckily, and got back on track. As I got older, things worked out a lot better for me. But we all go through these trials and tribulations, and Guards to Guardians gives an outlet for someone to speak, because we as correctional officers have a hard shell. We can do everything on our own. We don't need any help. And that's just the nature of our business. We don't want people to think we're weak. It's okay to call for help and ask for someone. Yeah. And I just wanted to say that before we get into communication, to kind of...
That's a big part of communication, asking for help.
Well, you're exactly right. You're communicating right, your issue, getting help. It's okay. Yes, you're right. The topic we discussed with the officers today, and we're not going to go over, we did a 12-minute word game, but we're not going to get into it on this video because it is in depth. And we had officers try to figure out the word game. And at first, they had the same reaction I did. It was like, God, this game is stupid. My first reaction when I was given the word game was, this is stupid. I don't understand it. Well, what it is it's a very hard word game, and if you feel like you can't get the answer, you start to get frustrated. And that's exactly what happened in the class. Some people were getting frustrated, they were getting tense, they were getting angry because they couldn't figure out the answer.
Yeah.
Well, that's the idea of the whole game we did today. And then I'm so glad one of the officers got the answer. 3 of the other officers were like this close. They actually gave an example, and then we asked for more, and they struggled some. Others attempted to get the answer. Well, what we were doing in that word game, and I cannot take credit for it, Hesham came up with this word game. It's a word game that's used by CEOs and executives and big companies, when they do their training. It's a word game that tries to show you that there is an underlying message in everything. You want to describe that real quick about what we're trying to show them about underlying messages that we need to listen for?
Yeah, so one of the things we stressed was listening is the biggest component of communication. I think most of the time, we listen to respond instead of listening to understand. And when you are just listening to respond, if you're responding in a way that isn't actually answering the real question that this person is asking, whether they complain about something, whether they are making a judgment, there's something else underneath that they're trying to actually ask, and they're not coming, they don't know how to maybe they don't know how to put those into words, maybe they don't know actually, they might be asking about something green, but they actually mean something red. So a lot of things can be misinterpreted in communication. And what happens then is in those moments, you start to see your patterns. You start to see where you get flustered. You start to see where you get angry. And in the particular example of officers, you'll start to see maybe where you rely on force, or maybe when you just totally neglect something. It's the same typical thing when you're fighting with your spouse about the dishes, right? Like that's the classic. It's never about the dishes, but if you just argue with her about the dishes, no one's being heard. No one's actually you're not going to feel connected. You're just going to feel tense, and you're going to argue, and you're going to go to bed mad. But if you can be there with that person, and be like, hey, I understand you're upset about the dishes. Is there anything else you're upset about? She'll go through a couple layers, or maybe a couple layers of this and that and this, and then, get to the root and then be just like, when this morning when we were leaving, you left the toilet seat up and I was mad. Or you said my dress wasn't pretty. Usually you tell me my dress is pretty, but you didn't tell me, and that tension starts to build up. And then when there's a moment for them to release it, like AKA the dishes, they'll start to then explode. And you're sitting there like, hey, the dishes are no big deal. So to me, the dishes are no big deal. But to my spouse, maybe it's something more than that. So it's okay to acknowledge that reality that she's having. Like, hey, I totally understand that dishes aren't being done. I get that. But what else is there? And then you get to that.
Yeah. And we explained to the officers that this class we gave this morning is good for your work family with your fellow officers and your fellow civilian staff that you work with. It's good for you with your home life, and it's good for you with friends, because this communication skill will help you in all facets of life. And I told the men in the class, the correctional officer males, that you can score some points at home with your spouse if you pay attention today, listening. So I want to stress that communication in corrections can be our most valuable tool. It's a tool that we can use to help de-escalate a situation before it ever starts. As you know, any incident with an inmate can become deadly. I don't care how small of an incident it is. I didn't get my food tray. Why in the hell didn't you give me my food tray? This is bullshit. I'm going to tear up my cell, blah, blah, blah. Well, do we immediately rush in and use force? Why? I'm not being attacked physically. That's a whole different story. But in this scenario, you're not being attacked physically. Keep your distance, call for backup if you have to. But what if I get to the root of the problem and I solve this without any use of force? And in the end, if you communicate with this inmate, talk to them, tell them to look in your eye, look you in the eye, look at me, inmate Jones, look at me. What's the problem? What's the problem? I didn't get my food tray and I'm really mad. Okay, listen, I'm going to check, because that's what we do as officers. We check to make sure that they're not trying to swing us for a second tray. We say, hey, I'm going to check. If you didn't get a food tray, I'm going to get you one. And remember, when you tell an inmate you're going to do something, you better do it, because you just told that inmate what you're going to do, and if you forget about them and leave them till supper time, you're going to have a lot of problems down the road.
Or the next officer.
Or the next officer will deal with the problem you just built.
Yeah.
So you take the inmate, say, let's go to the cell, put them in the cell. I'm going to look for your tray now, but I want you to be in your cell. Why are we doing that? We want to quell the incident. Now, if they didn't get a tray, I'm going to give them a tray. If there's some issues about threats to burn things down, destroy things like that, I'm going to let my supervisor know. My agency may request that you do a short incident report, but an incident report paragraph is much better than writing a whole use of force report, which takes the chain of command and you hours of work. It also is better than the possibility of you or the inmate getting hurt, right? Now, I did tell the officers this today. We are not telling you don't use force. Now, let me explain that. If you're being attacked by an inmate and they're going to physically harm you, of course you're going to use force. If an inmate is harming themselves and you can't stop them, you're going to call for backup and you're going to go in and stop them from harming themselves. If an inmates are in a fight and you tell them to stop, you call for backup, you get the backup, you use force to break them up. Please don't say, they say we're not, we're not saying never use force. We're saying you can prevent many uses of force though. So, if I can prevent 5 uses of force this month by using my verbal skills, my communication skills, that's 5 uses of force I don't have to deal with or the agency has to deal with. Why not work smarter, not harder? And I'm going to turn it over to you in a second, Hesham, for another thing I want to ask you. But, 80% of our day is communication. But I think correctional officers, we got about 150% of our day communication. 45 to 60% of that studies show communication is listening. Now, we have a little harder time with that as correctional officers. I have to admit, we're mandated to give verbal instruction all day. Count time. Sooner you're in, sooner you're out. Do this, do that. Clean up. Chow time. Med pass, whatever it is, we're giving orders all day long. But do you know that if you stop sometimes when there's a problem with an inmate and use that listening skill? By the way, listening skills also include body language. Watch their body language, because the body language is silent, but it's part of a listening skill.
Yeah.
So
just like you said, when you walk into the yard and then you hear an eerie silence, something's about to go down. But no one communicated that to you, but you pick it up,
right?
Because you listened, and you're like, oh, something doesn't feel right. So that was a good point as well.
Right. What he's referring to is, I told the class, you guys know, I said, you guys know what I'm talking about. The silence before the storm, and in their head, they were saying, yep. Something's wrong. That silence is not normal. Usually a lot of talking going on, a lot of things going on. You as a correctional officer learn these silent sounds of danger. You learn these body language signs of danger. That's all part of listening. I'm listening to the silence on the compound. We were trying to drive a lot of things home and get the point across that sometimes if you ask questions and dig deeper, you find what's under the surface, right?
That's right.
You want to tell a little bit about how to look under the surface for the underlying problem? Like in the scenario I gave, the underlying problem was the inmate didn't get a food tray. I could have escalated that and took him down and had a use of force.
Totally. So with most people in communication, something is said, and right away you're jumping to a conclusion. This person's either not being honest, or this person's this, or this person's that. And you're already jumping to fixing the issue. But most of the time when someone says something, are you sure that that's what they're actually saying? You know, I know, you might experience this with different people where what they mean is not what they say, right? So then in those moments, if you are quick to respond, you'll notice a little bit of an irritation. Maybe your response might come out with a little bit more of a command, like, "Hey, I don't care, just do this." But if you take a moment to then just be in that moment, be curious and ask some more questions. Like, "Hey, I guess you're angry. Tell me why." "Oh, this. Okay. Can you say more?" "Okay. I totally understand why you would be angry there. Can you give me another scenario where that happened to you? "Oh, what did you do in that scenario? What did you do here?" And then you can finally start to piece together what it is that's driving that person to react in that way. Because one thing that, we told this to the officers today too, by the time a physical, moment happens, there's already been a buildup, from before that builds up to that one moment. So these tensions in those moments of communication just kept building up, and then you're having a physical fight with someone, but you don't know why. They just picked you out of nowhere.
Right.
But then if you really start to communicate with someone and talk with them, you could know that, hey, maybe their parent passed away and they're going through a hard time and they don't like to talk about their feelings. Or someone took their tray and you don't understand why. Or something else happened, but you get to where there was a moment where something happened, and for most of us, when we don't know what to do in a situation, we feel powerless. And what do we do when we feel powerless? We go to control.
Yep.
We go to force. We'll go to the very thing that will help us reestablish a sense of stability because we're uncomfortable. But in those moments, you should actually use that moment of uncomfortability or irritation or tightness that you might be feeling to know, oh, okay, I'm missing something in this moment. There's actually it's an indicator, it's almost like a litmus test for you to know, like, oh, okay, there's something else happening. And then once you start to figure it out, all of a sudden, just like in your example, oh, they needed a food tray. Hey, totally get that. We'll go get you one.
And we also explained to the officers, that this communication skill helps you in so many ways because you want to go home safe to your family at night. And you want your family at work to be safe. So, communicating with your fellow officers now. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
You need to communicate with your fellow officers during your shift so everybody knows what's going on, especially if there's a problem going on or you think something's about to happen. Don't be quiet. Communicate that. Also with your medical personnel, also with your mental health folks, work together, people. Please communicate with each other. If medical doesn't know what you're doing and you don't know what medical's doing, it can cause an issue. If mental health is doing this and they don't tell you what the situation is, I know there's some client privilege there, but they need to tell you, hey, this is what this inmate needs. Maybe stay secluded for a while or whatever the case may be. Just communicate so that everybody's on the same page and a bomb doesn't go off because you weren't told something you should have been told. Also, so important, the off-going shift. They've got a problem that goes on, and unfortunately it happens, that officer didn't take care of that problem. Just kind of let it build and fluster because it's going home in an hour and I'm going to get out of here. It's not my worry anymore. You've just now possibly placed your fellow officers in danger. When you have a shift break, you've already been on shift 12 hours, 16 hours, you're trying to head out the door as fast as you can. Take 30 seconds. And say, hey, I got this issue going on here, here, and here. Keep an eye on that one. Keep an eye on this. And now this officer is not going to walk into a blind bomb, walk into a minefield, so to speak. Communication is key. And we could talk about this for hours. Yeah. We just want to get some things out there for you to think about with this video, things to use. You can use all these communication listening skills at work with your work family, at home, and with friends.
Yeah. Right on.
So thank you. We went 20 minutes. We'll stop there. We could talk on this for hours. But we got some good feedback when we asked for questions, and we had a few stay behind to talk to us. It's always good to see because correctional officers are known to
Have the hard group to talk to.
hard group to talk to, and if they're not interested in what you have to say when training's over, boom, they're out the door. But I was glad to see that we had some participation today, and the game went well. Thank you. It was a pleasure working with you at the prison
too,
today.
as always. Love having you.
Thank you very much, folks. Please be safe, and thank you for your service and dedication. Thank you.
Same here.